Everybody, it's Nicole. Welcome back to the Scrapbook and Cards Today magazine blog. Today we're here and we're going to talk about grids. For me, a grid is a really easy design way to kind of get things going on a project when you're really not sure what direction you want to take. A grid is a very easy way to combine a lot of different elements in a fun and simple way, and there's a lot of ways you can kind of think outside the grid while you're still using a grid. You'll see what I mean about that later. So for me, what I have here is paper pads here from Pink Paisley. I have a stack of the Turn the Page pattern paper, and then a stack of the sentiments that also are from Turn the Page. I pulled just several sentiments out of the pack and a lot of the pattern papers here, and I'm just gonna kind of line them up along the edges of my project. And I know, obviously everything here is a 2x2 square. It's a perfect way to kind of make a grid on your page. So I'm going to fool around a little bit with where I want to kind of place things, how I'm going to start. I kind of toy around with the idea of trimming some of these down. And really, I almost had too many ideas in my head, to be perfectly honest. But what I decided to do was all those sentiments I will put foam adhesive behind. And then I decided I kind of like the look of the little strips that I created just by trimming that 2x2 square into a 1x2 piece. So I decided for my pattern paper that I would end up trimming those down to 1x2. Now the trick to a page like this is kind of know where to start. So I decided the best thing for me to start was in this bottom left corner, and I started with one of those sentiments. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a grid across my page and kind of try to work it around where I want my photos. I want a photo on the left and a photo on the right, and I want to work my grid in around that. So because I'm not measuring anything, I'm not using a ruler here, I'm just going to eyeball everything as I go. You definitely could use a ruler if you wanted, but realistically it's going to all work out in the end. There's no wrong thing in scrapbooking, right? So I'm not actually adhering anything down, I'm just kind of placing things where I kind of want them to be. I'm paying attention here to color. I want to make sure that I don't have colors side by side like that mint green that I had just there with the Wonderful. There was mint green beside mint green, so I kind of move that around. And I'm mixing in multicolored patterns as I go. That's really just going to help blend all those colors in this collection together. These blocks of pattern paper, any pattern paper, even if you just use scraps that you trim down, they all go together. Each collection, if you're using one collection, it obviously all goes. So you really can't go wrong if you stick with something like that. If you're going to mix different companies, different manufacturers, my only suggestion to you is just make sure you have at least one or two pattern papers that you use that have a variety of the colors that you're going to use in your page. So I'm just kind of going along here, working my grid. You can see I kind of started along the bottom, moved my way across, and I'm just filling things in. Even though I'm using strips of paper, they do line up to a 2x2 square, so I am altering the direction of those. I'm keeping things in a square, but not the same direction. So some of those strips are horizontal, some of them are vertical, and then I'm just adding those word sentiment phrases in around. Because I didn't adhere anything down right at the onset, it gives me some variety. I can kind of change things up, move the colors around, play with the placement a little bit. But realistically, kind of really easy and a fun way to kind of work a project like this. I decided to start down with those two top corners. I was going to adhere everything down, but I thought my photos were getting a little lost in all that pattern. So you scrapbook for a reason, and a lot of that reason is probably your photos. So I always feel like your photos need to be the highlight of your project, whether or not you have a bunch of stuff going on in the background. So what I like to do is make sure, number one, my photos are large enough for my project to kind of balance out all those little bits on the page. And then when in doubt, add a mat. I always print my photos with a white border around the edge, whether it's a larger edge border or a smaller one. And in this case, I felt like it needed a little bit of black to balance out some of that color on the white background. So I'm just going to add each of my photos onto a black cardstock background. And then I decided I actually had a lot of room around my photos in my grid. So to fill in some of that, I thought the craft would actually look really nice because the craft will match pretty much everything. So I'm going to take those photos again, and I'm just trimming down some craft cardstock, and I'm going to make a second mat with that, just to kind of fill in some of the area and really make those photos pop and be the star of your page. Okay, so now that I have all that done, I'm going to add those into where I want them on my page, and I'm going to stick those down first, just so I can kind of move everything else around the photos. And then I'm going to go ahead and add just a little bit of tape runner to the back of each of those pieces of paper. I'm going to add sewing to my project, so I use a little less tape runner than you might if you're not going to sew on your page. And I'm just kind of eyeballing everything here, getting everything lined up visually, just to the eye. I'm not really worrying too much. And because I'm not using a lot of adhesive at the onset, I can easily wiggle things around. And once I sew, obviously, I'm committed. So that gives me a little bit of freedom before I do that. So I'm just putting things down, adhering them. And with the foam adhesive, you have a little less leniency if you need to tear something off and move it around. But as you can see, I can get that all put in place fairly quickly. So there are the last few pieces I'm going to add. I am going to go ahead and add some strips now. So this is a great time to break out probably a supply you've had in your stash or you haven't used in a while. I'm using some decorative scissors. These are actually just pinking shears, but any sort of decorative punch or decorative scissors you might have, and a scrap of white cardstock. And I've just trimmed it down to 2 inches, that scrap of cardstock. And so I'm just trimming off an edge and then trimming it down on my trimmer to make a tiny little skinny decorative strip. And I'm just going to put that on some of these rectangles and squares just to add a little bit of visual interest. And I am going to sew those on so it kind of looks a little bit like a quilt in the end. So I'm just going to add a little bit of those here, both horizontally and vertically, just to add another tiny little layer onto the project. And those, moving those lines around the page like that kind of helps the non-alignment issue if you see one, because I see one. But helps kind of draw your eye away from all that. So now I've gone ahead and I've sewed. That was very fast. And I want to add another layer to the project. So I've grabbed some little items here like these Post-it flags from crepe paper. There are some really great colors that really blend well with this collection, so I'm going to add some of those in there. And as you can see, as I'm placing these down, I am actually overlapping into my grid, into the open space, or even over the next piece of paper. And that's just going to help draw things together. So even though there's a grid on the page, and that's my intention, you still want to have things kind of blend really well. So if you have some things overhanging over your grid, you'll notice that it kind of just draws everything and blends it really well together. So things like tags, labels, stickers, floral elements, those are all really great things to use to do that. So for example, I'm just going to pop this little tag here and tuck it underneath that one sentiment in the top and then over top of one of those pieces of paper. So now I want to figure out a title before I do a whole lot more sewing. I did sew those flags down in between here. I trim that out of the video, but I'm going to add this word "you" in here. It's nice and bold and black. And what I decided to do with that is just stick them together because they are letter stickers. I did want them to pop a little, so I'm going to use some foam adhesive here and have them sticking together. You can kind of overlap the foam adhesive to keep those stickers in place. And then I'm just going to line them up and stick them down in the bottom corner of my project here. And to kind of make that "you" a little more fun, I just took a chipboard glittered heart here. And now I'm going to decide what other fun little elements I want to add. So kind of have started with the larger elements, which is all that pattern paper and the title. And now I'm working my way down to a smaller kind of embellishment. So I have some florals here. I have a butterfly. I'm just going to kind of pop those in and around my photos just to kind of overlap, as I said earlier, some of the grid area to kind of clean up and, make everything kind of meld together a little nicer. Don't be afraid to trim down some die cuts if they're a little too large or just, you don't like a certain element in there. You can trim them down. And then I'm going to go back and grab that flower there, and I'm going to add that with some foam adhesive over the edge of one of my photos. And ended up moving it down, switching them around, having the gold, rose gold at the top, and then I use that other one as kind of like a photo corner on that bottom corner on the page. So from here, I'm just going to add a few tiny smaller embellishments now. I really love these sprinkles by Doodlebug. They're a great way just to bring in little pops of color into the more whiter areas of your project. So I'm just going to add a red, some yellow, and then a teal kind of blue color, just to add a little bit of layer over top of those pennants just to tie some things together. So a really, really easy way to make a grid on your page. Just think how fun this would look if you had cut those squares into circles, maybe hearts. You could do triangles, large triangles, cut them into mini triangles, layer things, little bits, use up some of that stuff you've been hoarding. I know you have. I'm not alone here. And I hope you're going to give this a try. Let's see those grids you can make. Make sure you tag us on Instagram and Facebook, and we'll see you again next month for another Design with video. Bye-bye.